The chestnut-haired woman trembled as the stagecoach rattled over the final stretch of dusty road leading to Sacramento, California, in the spring of 1873. Theodora Hale clutched the worn leather satchel in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. Inside was the bundle of letters she'd exchanged with Samuel Garrison, the man who would become her husband before the sun set tomorrow, a man she'd never met, and a man she had thoroughly deceived. The weight of her fabrications pressed against her chest like a physical burden. In her letters, she'd painted herself as a refined Boston lady of modest wealth, accomplished in music and literature, with delicate health that required care but wouldn't impede her duties as a wife. The truth was far different. Theodora was the daughter of a laundress, with calloused hands that told the story of years of hard work. Her only inheritance was a single silver hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother. She knew no music beyond the folk songs her mother had taught her, and her knowledge of literature came from the few precious books she'd managed to save from pawnshops. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, and Theodora swallowed hard. She brushed imaginary dust from her second hand, dressed her best and only good garment, and took a deep breath. This deception had been born of desperation after her mother's death left her alone in Boston with mounting debts and no prospects. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like divine providence. Rancher seeks respectable wife, must be literate and of good character, passage paid. Sacramento, the driver called out, end of the line. Theodora gathered her meager belongings and stepped down onto the wooden platform of the station, squinting in the bright California sunlight. Her gaze swept the crowd, searching for the tall, broad-shouldered man Samuel had described himself to be. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she spotted a man standing apart from the others, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Samuel Garrison had been watching the stagecoach since it appeared on the horizon, raising dust as it approached Sacramento. At 32, he had built his cattle ranch from nothing, through determination and backbreaking work. Now, with the ranch finally prospering, he had decided it was time for a wife. The woman he'd been corresponding with for 6 months seemed perfect, educated yet practical, genteel yet not afraid of hard work. His eyes scanned the passengers disembarking until they landed on a slender woman in a blue dress that had seen better days. She didn't match the description his bride-to-be had provided. This woman was thinner, her face more angular with high cheekbones that spoke of hardship rather than the pleasingly plump countenance Theodora had described. Her hair was indeed chestnut, as she'd written, but it was thicker and wilder than the elegantly coiffed tresses she'd mentioned. Their eyes met across the platform. Samuel removed his hat and stepped forward, revealing a handsome face weathered by sun and wind. His jaw was strong, his eyes a piercing blue that seemed to look right through Theodora's façade. "Miss Hale?" he inquired, his voice deep and steady. Theodora nodded, unable to find her voice for a moment. "Mr. Garrison," she finally managed, "it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance at last." He took her small valise, his eyes never leaving her face. "The pleasure is mine. Welcome to Sacramento." As they walked to his wagon, Theodora felt his sideways glances. She knew he was comparing her to the woman he'd expected, and she braced herself for the inevitable confrontation. Samuel helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. He took the reins but didn't immediately set the horses in motion. "Miss Hale," he said quietly, "I believe we need to have a conversation before we proceed to the ranch." Theodora's stomach clenched. "Yes, I suppose we do." "You're not what I expected." She looked down at her hands, noting the rough skin that no amount of sugar scrubbing had been able to soften. "No, I imagine I'm not. Your letters describe someone quite different." Theodora closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. "Mr. Garrison, I haven't been entirely truthful in my correspondence." His expression remained impassive. "I gathered as much." "I'm not a lady of refinement," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've never played the pianoforte, I've never attended finishing school." My father wasn't a merchant who left me a modest inheritance. He was a dock worker who died when I was 12, and my mother was a laundress. I worked alongside her until she died 3 months ago. She waited for his anger for him to turn the wagon around and deposit her back at the stagecoach station. Instead, he simply nodded. What about your health? You mentioned a delicate constitution. Another falsehood, she admitted. I'm quite robust, actually. I've never missed a day's work due to illness. A flicker of something relief crossed his face. And your age? I'm 24, as I wrote. That much was true. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Theodora fought the urge to squirm under his scrutiny. Why the deception, Miss Hale? Because no man wants a penniless laundress for a wife, she replied honestly. I had nothing to offer but myself, and that didn't seem enough. To her surprise, the corner of Samuel's mouth quirked upward. I advertised for a wife, not an heiress, Miss Hale. But your letters spoke of your appreciation for refinement and culture, things I know nothing about. Samuel sighed, looking out over the town. I may have embellished certain aspects of my character as well. Theodora blinked in surprise. You did? I've never read Shakespeare, he admitted. I enjoyed sounding educated in our correspondence, but the truth is, I've had little formal education. What I know, I learned through necessity and experience. A bubble of nervous laughter escaped Theodora's lips. So we've both been deceiving each other. It appears so. His expression softened. The question is, what do we do now? Theodora squared her shoulders, preparing herself for rejection. I understand if you wish to send me back east, Mr. Garrison. I have enough saved for a ticket to Boston. Samuel shook his head slowly. That's not what I'm suggesting, Miss Hale. Then what? He turned to face her fully, his eyes earnest. Your letter was full of lies, Miss Hale, but so was mine. Perhaps we could build truth together instead. Theodora stared at him, hardly daring to hope. What do you mean? I mean that I still need a wife and you still need a home. We can start fresh with honesty between us. No more pretense, just two people learning about each other as we truly are. You would still have me, knowing I deceived you? Samuel's expression was thoughtful. I believe in judging people by their actions, not their words. You had the courage to come 3,000 miles to marry a stranger. That tells me more about your character than any letter could. Hope unfurled in Theodora's chest. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Garrison. I may not be the refined lady I pretended to be, but I can cook, clean, mend, and I learn quickly. And I'm not the cultured gentleman I pretended to be, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. But I've built a good ranch, and I can promise you'll never want for anything essential. He held out his hand to her. What do you say, Miss Hale? Shall we start again with truth between us? Theodora looked at his outstretched hand, strong, calloused, marked by years of hard work not unlike her own. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Yes, Mr. Garrison, I'd like that very much. He nodded once, seemingly satisfied, and finally flicked the reins to set the horses in motion. Then let's go home. The wagon rumbled out of Sacramento, heading east toward the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. As the town receded behind them, Theodora felt both trepidation and a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. My ranch is about 15 miles outside of town, Samuel explained as they traveled. It's not the grandest place, but it's good land with plenty of water. How many cattle do you run? She asked, genuinely interested. About 300 head now. Started with just 20 when I came out here in '65, right after the war. You fought in the war, he nodded. Union cavalry. That's where I learned to ride properly. Theodora absorbed this new information, building a truer picture of the man beside her. Were you wounded? She asked softly. Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. Yes, took a bullet in the shoulder at Gettysburg. It still aches when rain's coming. I'm sorry, he shrugged. Many men fared worse. I was lucky. They fell into a companionable silence as the wagon rolled through the golden California countryside. The landscape was unlike anything Theodora had seen before. Rolling hills covered in dry grass that rippled like waves in the breeze. dotted with massive oak trees that provided islands of shade in the vast golden sea. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Samuel glanced at her, a hint of pride in his expression. "Different from Boston, I imagine. Very different, but wonderful in its own way." As the afternoon wore on, they began to share more truths. Samuel told her about growing up on a small farm in Pennsylvania, the third of 7 children, and how he'd headed west after the war to make his own way. Theodora spoke of her childhood in Boston's crowded North End, helping her mother with the laundry business from the age of 10. "Did you have any schooling?" he asked. "Some. I attended the local school until I was 14. I was good at figures, had to be, to help mother with the accounts." "That's useful on a ranch," he noted. "I'm terrible with bookkeeping." By the time the sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber, they had covered much ground both literally and figuratively. Theodora found herself warming to this straightforward man who had accepted her deception with such equanimity. "There it is," Samuel said eventually, pointing ahead to where a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley. "Garrison Ranch." Theodora leaned forward eagerly. The main house was modest but solidly built of timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A large barn stood nearby along with several smaller outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and in the distance she could make out the shapes of cattle grazing on the hillsides. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Samuel looked pleased. "It's taken 8 years to build it up to what you see now." As they approached, a dog came bounding out to meet them, a large black and white border collie that barked excitedly. "That's Ranger," Samuel said. "Best cattle dog in the county." A man emerged from the barn as they pulled up to the house, tall and lanky, with graying hair. "And that's Tom Hayes. He's been with me almost from the beginning. There's also a young fellow named Miguel who helps with the cattle, but he's probably out with the herd." Theodora felt a flutter of nervousness. These people were to be part of her new life, her new family. Would they accept her? Samuel helped her down from the wagon. "Tom," he called out, "come meet Miss Hale." Tom approached, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Hayes," she replied with a nod. "I'm very happy to meet you." "Tom's been keeping the place running while I was in town," Samuel explained. "He's the best foreman a rancher could ask for." Tom looked embarrassed at the praise. "Just doing my job, boss." He glanced between them. "I've got supper on the stove, nothing fancy, just a pot of beans and some cornbread." "That sounds wonderful," Theodora said quickly. "I'm famished after the journey." "Let me show you the house first," Samuel suggested. He grabbed her valise and led her up the steps to the porch. The main room of the house was larger than Theodora had expected, with a stone fireplace at one end and windows that let in the evening light. The furniture was simple but sturdy: a pine table with 4 chairs, a sofa covered in faded green fabric, and a rocking chair near the hearth. "The kitchen's through there," Samuel said, pointing to a doorway. "And there are 2 bedrooms down that hall." Theodora nodded, taking it all in. The house was clean but sparse, clearly wanting a woman's touch. "It's not what you're accustomed to, I'm sure," Samuel said, watching her carefully. "Mr. Garrison," she replied with a small smile, "I grew up in 2 rooms above a laundry. This is palatial by comparison." Relief crossed his face. "You'll stay in the 2nd bedroom until—" "Well, until we're wed, if that's still what you want." The question hung in the air between them. Despite their newfound honesty, they were still virtual strangers. "Is it what you want, Mr. Garrison?" she asked quietly. He looked at her steadily. "Yes, Miss Hale, it is, but I won't hold you to our arrangement if you've changed your mind." Theodora considered her options. She could ask to return to Sacramento, perhaps find work there. But to do what? Laundry again, domestic service, and then what? The prospect of building a life here with this forthright man and his honest offer was far more appealing. "I haven't changed my mind," she said firmly. Samuel's expression lightened. "Good, the Reverend can marry us tomorrow as planned." Tom called from the kitchen that supper was ready and they joined him at the table. The meal was simple but hearty, and Theodora realized she hadn't eaten properly since leaving Boston. "This is delicious, Mr. Hayes," she said after her first bite of cornbread. "Call me Tom, madam." "Everyone does," he smiled, revealing a gap between his front teeth. "And thank you, I do my best, but we'll all be mighty glad to have a woman's cooking around here." "I'll do my best not to disappoint," she promised. As they ate, Tom regaled her with stories about the ranch and the surrounding area. Samuel mostly listened, occasionally adding a comment or correction. Theodora found herself relaxing in their company, the anxiety of the day gradually ebbing away. After supper, Tom excused himself to check on the horses, leaving Theodora and Samuel alone. "You must be tired after your journey," Samuel said, standing. "Let me show you to your room." The second bedroom was small but neat, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a pine dresser, and a washstand with a pitcher and bowl. "It's not much," Samuel said apologetically. "It's perfect," Theodora assured him. She hesitated, then added, "Mr. Garrison, I want to thank you for your understanding today. Many men would not have been so forgiving of my deception." He leaned against the doorframe, regarding her thoughtfully. "Miss Hale, I believe people deserve second chances. Lord knows I've needed a few in my time. There was a story there," she sensed, "but now wasn't the time to pry. Even so, you've shown me great kindness." "It's not kindness so much as practicality," he said with a hint of a smile. "I still need a wife, and from what I've seen today, you'll make a fine one." The compliment warmed her. "I'll certainly try. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." He turned to leave, then paused. "If you need anything, I'll be in the front room for a while." After he left, Theodora unpacked her few possessions. From the bottom of her valise, she pulled out the silver hairbrush, her one connection to the past she was leaving behind. She ran it through her hair, wincing as it caught in the tangles created by the long journey. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the night sounds of the ranch so different from the constant hubbub of Boston. An owl hooted somewhere nearby. Cattle lowed in the distance. The house creaked and settled around her. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Samuel Garrison. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. They were strangers still, yet something about his steady presence gave her hope. He had offered her a fresh start, a chance to build something true from the ashes of their mutual deception. As sleep finally claimed her, Theodora's last thought was that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found not just shelter but a home. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee brewing. Theodora dressed quickly in her blue dress, the only suitable garment she owned for a wedding. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up as neatly as she could. From her valise, she took a small brooch that had been her mother's, a simple silver design that was her only ornamentation. When she emerged from her room, she found Samuel already dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes widened slightly. "Good morning, Miss Hale," he said, rising from the table where he'd been drinking coffee. "You look very nice." "Thank you, Mr. Garrison, as do you." An awkward silence fell between them. Today they would pledge their lives to each other, a momentous step under any circumstances, but especially for two people who had only just begun to know each other's true selves. "Coffee," Samuel offered, breaking the tension. "Please." He poured her a cup and added a splash of milk without asking. She raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You mentioned in one of your letters that you prefer coffee with milk," he explained. "At least I hope that part was true." Theodora smiled. "It was, thank you for remembering." Tom entered from outside, also dressed in his Sunday best. "Morning, folks. Fine day for a wedding." "Is the Reverend coming here?" Theodora asked. Samuel shook his head. "We'll go to him. His church is just outside of Sacramento." After a breakfast of eggs and biscuits, they set out for town in the wagon, which Samuel had cleaned and decorated with a few wildflowers. Theodora sat between the two men, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Nervous," Samuel asked quietly. A little, she admitted. Aren't you? He considered this. I'm cautious by nature, Miss Hale, but I'm not one to second-guess a decision once I've made it. And you've decided on me despite everything? I have. His certainty was reassuring. Whatever his reasons for wanting a wife companionship, help with the ranch, perhaps even children someday, he had chosen to move forward with her, lies and all. The church was a simple white clapboard building with a modest steeple. Reverend Parker, a kindly older man with spectacles and a trim white beard, greeted them warmly. Samuel, good to see you, and this must be Miss Hale. Pleased to meet you, Reverend, Theodora said, shaking his offered hand. The pleasure is mine, my dear. Samuel has spoken quite highly of you in his letters. Theodora flushed, wondering what Samuel had shared. Had he written of her supposed refinement and education? Shall we begin? The Reverend asked, gesturing toward the altar. The ceremony was brief but moving. Standing before the altar, with Tom as their witness and the morning sunlight streaming through the church's windows, they exchanged vows. Samuel's voice never wavered as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her. Theodora's own voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was firm. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel leaned forward and placed a gentle, chaste kiss on her lips, their first physical contact beyond a handshake. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, and Theodora felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. Mrs. Garrison, Samuel said as they parted, testing the name. Mr. Garrison, she replied with a small smile. They signed the marriage certificate with Tom and the Reverend as witnesses, and then it was done. Theodora Hale was now Theodora Garrison, wife of a California cattle rancher 3,000 miles from the city of her birth. As they left the church, Tom offered his congratulations, then excused himself. I'll take the stage back to town, he said. Got some supplies to pick up. Give you two some privacy. Samuel nodded his thanks, and soon Theodora found herself alone with her new husband for the journey back to the ranch. Are you hungry? Samuel asked as they drove away from Sacramento. We could stop for a meal in town if you'd like. That's very thoughtful, but I'm fine, she assured him. In truth, her stomach was too knotted with nerves to contemplate food. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Theodora watched the landscape roll by, still marveling at the vastness of the country and the dramatic change from the crowded streets of Boston. I've been thinking, Samuel said eventually. We've agreed to build truth between us, but I realize we still know very little about each other beyond the basics. Perhaps we should remedy that. What would you like to know? Theodora asked. Everything, eventually, but let's start with something simple. What makes you happy, Theodora? The use of her given name startled her, but she liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. She considered his question carefully. Small things, I suppose. A hot cup of tea on a cold morning, the smell of fresh bread, a good book, seeing seeds I've planted sprout and grow. She glanced at him. What about you? The land after a rain, the sight of a healthy calf being born, a fire in the hearth on a winter night. He smiled slightly. And now, perhaps, having someone to share those things with. The simple honesty of his words touched her. I'd like that too. They continued exchanging questions and answers as the wagon rolled on favorite seasons, spring for her, fall for him. Foods they enjoyed, apple pie for both. Memories of childhood, climbing trees for him, helping her mother with fancy laundry and sneaking peeks at beautiful dresses for her. By the time they reached the ranch, Theodora felt she knew her husband better than she had any right to after just 2 days. He was a practical man, but not without appreciation for beauty. He valued honesty and hard work above all, and beneath his reserved exterior, there was a gentle heart. Miguel, the young ranch hand Tom had mentioned, was waiting for them at the house. He doffed his hat respectfully as Samuel helped Theodora down from the wagon. Congratulations, patron, he said with a wide smile, and to you, senora. Thank you, Miguel, Theodora replied. I'm very happy to meet you. Miguel has prepared a surprise for us. Samuel said, guiding her toward the house. "Something of a wedding feast, I believe." Inside, the table was set with the ranch's best dishes and a spread that made Theodora's eyes widen. A roasted chicken, potatoes, cornbread, green beans, and even a cake decorated with wild berries. "Miguel, this is wonderful," she exclaimed. The young man blushed. "My mother's recipes, Señora, I hope you enjoy." They invited Miguel to join them, and the three shared the wedding feast together. Theodora learned that Miguel had been working at the ranch for 3 years, having come north from his family's small farm near San Diego. "My family is large," he explained. "Too many sons, not enough land, so I came north to find work." "Miguel is the best hand with horses I've ever seen," Samuel added. "Taught me a few things about breaking the wild ones gently." As the afternoon waned, Miguel tactfully excused himself to tend to the evening chores, leaving the newlyweds alone again. An awkward silence fell between them as they both realized the day was drawing to a close, and with it came the expectations of a wedding night. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" Samuel offered, clearly sensing her nervousness. "We still have an hour or so of daylight." "Yes, I'd like that very much," Theodora said gratefully. He showed her the barn with its stalls for the working horses and the milk cow, the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched and clucked, the smokehouse, and the small vegetable garden that was in need of attention. "I've tried to grow a few things," Samuel admitted, "but I'm better with cattle than carrots." "I could help with this," Theodora offered eagerly. "I always wanted a garden in Boston, but we never had the space." "It's yours to do with as you please," he said with a smile. By the time they completed their tour, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. They stood together on the porch, watching as the colors deepened and then faded. "It's beautiful here," Theodora said softly. "It can be harsh too," Samuel warned. "Summers are hot and dry, winters bring floods in the valley, and there's always the threat of fire." "Every place has its challenges," she replied, "but having someone to face them with makes all the difference." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "Yes, it does." As darkness fell, they returned inside. Samuel lit the lamps, their golden glow creating pools of warm light in the main room. "Are you tired?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, though exhaustion wasn't the primary emotion she was feeling. Samuel cleared his throat. "Theodora, I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, we barely know each other, and I wouldn't presume." She blushed deeply, understanding his meaning. "That's very considerate of you. We have time," he said simply. "I'd rather we become friends before we become more." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her chest. "I think that's wise. You can keep the bedroom you used last night," he continued. "I'll take the other room." "But that's your room," she protested. "And you're my wife," he countered. "Your comfort matters to me." The consideration he showed touched her deeply. "Thank you, Samuel." They bid each other good night somewhat awkwardly, retreating to their separate rooms. Theodora changed into her nightdress and sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her hair slowly as she reflected on the day's events. She was married. She, Theodora Hale, no, Garrison now was a married woman. The reality of it was still sinking in. Her husband was a good man, she believed, straightforward and honorable. Not the cultured gentleman she had imagined corresponding with, but perhaps something better. A man who valued truth and was willing to start anew despite her deception. Sleep came more easily than she expected, the emotional and physical toll of the past 2 days finally catching up with her. The next morning marked the beginning of her life as a rancher's wife. Theodora rose early, determined to prove her worth. She found Samuel already up, building a fire in the kitchen stove. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy in her role as wife. "Morning," he replied, looking up with a smile. "Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," he gestured to the stove. "I'm afraid breakfast is usually just coffee and whatever's left from the night before. I'm not much of a cook." "Let me," she offered, moving forward. "Cooking is something I can do well." While Samuel went out to help Tom and Miguel with the morning chores, Theodora familiarized herself with the kitchen. The pantry was adequately stocked, if simply, with staples like flour, sugar, coffee, and dried beans. She found eggs in the chicken coop and milk from the cow that Miguel had already brought in. By the time the men returned, she had prepared a breakfast of fried eggs, biscuits, and gravy that had them all exclaiming with pleasure. "If you cook like this every day, Mrs. Garrison, I might never leave," Tom declared, mopping up the last of his gravy with a biscuit. "It's just simple food," Theodora demurred, though she was pleased by their enthusiasm. "Simple but good," Samuel said, his approval evident. "Thank you." After breakfast, the men went about their ranch duties, and Theodora set to work on the house. It was clean but Spartan, clearly maintained by men with little time or inclination for decorative touches. She spent the morning taking inventory of what was available and making a list of what she might need to make it more comfortable. At midday, she prepared a simple lunch and took it out to the men who were mending a fence near the barn. The surprise and gratitude on their faces made her smile. "You didn't need to bring this out to us," Samuel said as they sat in the shade of an oak tree to eat. "I wanted to," she replied. "Besides, it gave me a chance to see more of the ranch in daylight." The days began to fall into a pattern. Theodora rose early to prepare breakfast, spent the mornings on household tasks. The afternoons tending to the garden she was reclaiming from weeds and neglect, and the evenings cooking dinner and sitting with Samuel by the fire. He would often read aloud from one of the few books he owned, mostly practical guides to ranching and agriculture, but also a volume of Mark Twain's stories that made them both laugh. Each night, they retired to their separate bedrooms, though Theodora was increasingly aware of a growing attraction to her husband. His consideration, his quiet strength, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled all combined to stir feelings she hadn't anticipated. A week after their wedding, a late spring storm blew in from the Pacific, bringing much-needed rain to the parched landscape. Theodora stood on the porch, watching as the rain transformed the golden hills to a richer hue. Samuel joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he murmured. "Yes," she agreed. "In Boston, rain was just something to endure. Here it feels like a blessing." "It is. The land drinks it in like a thirsty man." They stood in companionable silence, watching the rain fall. A gust of wind drove the droplets under the porch roof, spattering them both. Theodora laughed, stepping back, and found herself pressed against Samuel's chest. His hands came up to steady her, resting lightly on her shoulders. Time seemed to slow as she turned to face him. His blue eyes were dark with an emotion she was beginning to recognize because it mirrored her own. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Samuel lowered his head and kissed her. Unlike the chaste peck at their wedding, this was a real kiss, warm and tender, a question and an answer all at once. Theodora's arms slipped around his waist, and she leaned into him, responding to the gentle pressure of his lips with her own. When they parted, they were both breathing a little faster. Samuel's hands still rested on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing small circles that sent shivers down her spine. "I've been wanting to do that for days," he admitted, his voice husky. "I've been hoping you would," she confessed. He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "Have you now?" "Yes." She felt bold, empowered by the honesty that had become the foundation of their relationship. "You're a good man, Samuel Garrison. I find myself very fortunate to be your wife, and I to be your husband." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "Theodora, I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I meant it, but I also want you to know that I'm coming to care for you a great deal." The simple declaration warmed her more than any flowery profession of undying love could have. "I feel the same," she said softly. He kissed her again, more confidently this time, and Theodora melted against him, her heart racing with newfound joy. That evening they sat closer together by the fire, their hands occasionally touching, exchanging smiles that held new meaning. When it came time to retire, Samuel walked her to her bedroom door. "Good night, Theodora," he said, kissing her softly. "Good night, Samuel." She watched him walk to his own room, a mixture of contentment and anticipation filling her chest. They were building something precious. She realized a relationship founded on truth and growing affection rather than the fantasies they had constructed in their letters. As spring gave way to summer, Theodora settled fully into her role as a rancher's wife. Her garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table. She learned to make cheese from the cow's milk, to preserve fruits and vegetables for the winter months, and even to ride the gentle mare Samuel had chosen for her from his herd. The boundaries between them continued to blur. Kisses on the porch became a regular occurrence. Their conversations grew deeper, more intimate. They shared stories of their past lives, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Samuel took her hand in his. "Theodora," he said, his voice serious, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "Before I came west, back in Pennsylvania, I was engaged once before. This was unexpected." "What happened?" he sighed, looking out at the darkening land. "Her name was Elizabeth. We grew up together, planned to marry after I returned from the war. But when I came back wounded, changed by what I'd seen, she decided she wanted a different life." "I'm sorry," Theodora said softly, squeezing his hand. "It was for the best," he said. "We wanted different things. She married a merchant in Philadelphia, last I heard." He turned to look at her. "I just wanted you to know, no more secrets between us. Thank you for telling me." She hesitated, then decided to share her own past. "There was someone once for me too, a clerk at the textile mill where my mother did laundry. He said he loved me, promised to marry me, but when my mother fell ill and our circumstances worsened, he disappeared." Samuel's jaw tightened. "He was a fool, perhaps, or just practical," she shrugged. "Either way, it taught me not to trust promises easily." "I hope you can trust mine," he said quietly. She looked at him, this man who had accepted her despite her deception, who had offered to build truth with her, who had shown her nothing but respect and growing affection. "I do," she said simply. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. "Theodora, would you consider sharing my room tonight, as my wife in all ways?" The directness of his question might have shocked her once, but their relationship had been built on honesty from the moment they acknowledged their mutual deception. She appreciated that he asked rather than assumed. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. "I would like that very much." That night, in the darkness of what was now truly their bedroom, they came together as husband and wife. Samuel was gentle and considerate, guiding her through unfamiliar territory with patience and tenderness. What began as awkward exploration soon transformed into something beautiful, a physical expression of the bond that had been growing between them since that first honest conversation on the Sacramento station platform. Afterward, lying in his arms, Theodora felt a sense of completeness she had never known was possible. "Are you all right?" Samuel murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than all right," she assured him, nestling closer. As summer progressed, their relationship deepened. They worked side by side during the day, Theodora helping with ranch chores when needed, Samuel assisting her in the garden or with household repairs. At night, they shared their bed and their dreams. In late July, a heat wave descended on the valley, baking the land and making tempers short. Water became precious, and Samuel spent long days ensuring the cattle had access to the creek that ran through the eastern portion of his property. "The Anderson Ranch lost 10 head yesterday," he reported grimly one evening. "Creek on their land dried up completely. Could that happen here?" Theodora asked, concerned. "It's possible if this heat continues, but our creek is spring-fed, which helps." The next morning, Samuel and his men rode out before dawn to move the herd closer to the water. Theodora spent the day indoors, where it was marginally cooler, preserving the last of the summer berries and preparing for the fall harvest. When dusk approached, and the men hadn't returned, she began to worry. It wasn't like Samuel to stay out past dark without sending word. She had just decided to saddle her mare and look for them when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her as she rushed to the door, but it wasn't Samuel who dismounted before the porch. It was Miguel, his face grim. "Señora, there's been an accident," he said without preamble. "The patron is hurt." Fear gripped her heart. "How badly? Where is he?" "Tom is bringing him in the wagon. A ravine collapsed under his horse near the north pasture. The horse is lost and the patron, his leg is badly broken, I think." Theodora's mind raced. "How far away are they?" "Maybe half an hour behind me. I rode ahead to warn you." "We need to prepare," she said, forcing herself to be practical despite her fear. "Miguel, can you clear off the table in the main room and bring in fresh water from the well? I'll gather bandages and my sewing kit." By the time Tom's wagon rumbled into the yard, Theodora had transformed the main room into a makeshift infirmary. Fresh sheets covered the table, a kettle of water was heating on the stove, and she had laid out clean cloths, her sewing needles and thread, and the bottle of whiskey Samuel kept for medicinal purposes. The sight of her husband, pale and grim, faced with pain, made her heart clench. His right leg was splinted with branches and bound with strips of cloth already soaked through with blood. "Samuel," she breathed, rushing to his side as Tom and Miguel carried him in. "I'm all right," he grunted, though his ashen complexion belied his words. "Just a broken leg." "Let's get him on the table," Theodora directed, her voice steadier than she felt. Once they had him situated, she carefully cut away his blood-soaked trouser leg. The break was bad, the white of bone protruding through the skin just below his knee. "We need a doctor," she said, looking to Tom. "Nearest one's in Sacramento," he replied grimly. "That's a 3-hour ride and then the same back." "Then go," she urged, quickly. "Miguel and I will do what we can until you return." As Tom rode off, Theodora turned her attention back to her husband. "Samuel, this is going to hurt. I need to clean the wound and try to set the bone before infection sets in." He nodded, his jaw tight. "Do what you must." She gave him the whiskey bottle. "Drink as much as you can stand." While Samuel took several long pulls from the bottle, Theodora explained to Miguel what she needed him to do. "I'll need you to hold him down and then help me pull the leg to set the bone back in place." Miguel looked terrified but nodded resolutely. The next hour was the most harrowing of Theodora's life. She cleaned the wound as gently as possible, but each touch made Samuel groan despite his efforts to remain stoic. When it came time to set the bone, she gave him a thick leather belt to bite down on. "Ready?" she asked, meeting his pain-glazed eyes. He nodded once sharply. "Miguel, hold his shoulders." "Samuel, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. She pulled firmly on his ankle, feeling the resistance and then the sickening slide as the bone moved back into place. Samuel's entire body went rigid, a muffled scream escaping around the leather belt. Then his eyes rolled back and he mercifully lost consciousness. "Is he?" Miguel asked, pale beneath his tan. "Just fainted," Theodora assured him, checking her husband's pulse. "It's better this way. Let's get him bandaged up properly while he's out." By the time Samuel regained consciousness, they had splinted his leg more effectively and moved him to the bed. Theodora sat beside him, bathing his forehead with a cool cloth. "Theodora," he murmured, his voice thick. "I'm here," she said, relief washing over her. "Try not to move. Your leg is set, but it needs to heal. The cattle. Miguel and Tom will handle them. You need to rest and heal." His hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "You did well." "I was terrified," she admitted, "couldn't tell." His eyes drifted closed again. "Strong woman. Knew I chose right." She sat with him through the night, keeping watch for fever. By morning, the doctor had arrived, a gruff, elderly man named Dr. Wilson who examined Samuel's leg with practiced hands. "Good work setting this," he said, nodding to Theodora. "Clean job. He's lucky you knew what to do." "My father broke his arm when I was young," she explained. "I watched the doctor set it." "Well, you've got good instincts. The bone should heal cleanly if he stays off it." The doctor looked at Samuel sternly. That means complete bed rest for at least 3 weeks, then crutches for another month. No riding, no ranch work. Understand? Samuel looked ready to argue, but a glance at Theodora's determined face made him sigh in resignation. Yes, doctor. The weeks that followed tested them both. Samuel was a terrible patient, chafing at his confinement and worrying constantly about the ranch. Theodora found herself juggling household duties with nursing her husband and helping Tom and Miguel keep the ranch running as best they could. To everyone's surprise, she revealed a talent for ranch management. The skills she'd learned keeping her mother's laundry business afloat translated well to the ranch's accounts and operations. She rode out with Miguel to check on the cattle, negotiated with the feed merchant for better prices, and even helped deliver a calf when one of the heifers had difficulties. "You're a natural," Tom told her one evening as they went over the ledger. "The ranch is doing better with you running things than it ever did with just us men." "I'm just doing what needs to be done," she demurred. "That's exactly right," he said with a nod. "You see what needs doing and you do it without fuss or complaint. The patron chose well when he sent for you." The compliment warmed her, especially given how different she was from the refined lady Samuel had expected. In their bedroom, where Samuel was gradually recovering, their relationship deepened further. With physical passion temporarily set aside by his injury, they talked for hours about their childhoods, their hopes for the ranch, their dreams for the future. "I never thought I could have this," Samuel admitted one evening, watching her mend a shirt by lamplight. "After Elizabeth left, I convinced myself that I was meant to be alone, that the ranch was enough. And now," she asked, looking up from her sewing, "now I can't imagine life without you," he said simply. "You've made this house a home, Theodora. You've made my life complete in ways I never expected." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Even though I came to you on false pretenses?" "Maybe because of it," he said thoughtfully. "If we'd both continued pretending to be what we're not, we might never have found this honesty between us." She set aside her sewing and moved to sit on the edge of the bed, taking his hand in hers. "I love you, Samuel Garrison," she said, the words coming easily now that she knew them to be true. "Not the gentleman I imagined from your letters, but the real man you are." His eyes shone in the lamplight. "And I love you, Theodora Garrison. Not the refined Boston lady, but the strong, capable, honest woman who has become my partner in all things." By the time autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and russet, Samuel was up and about on crutches, his leg healing well. The ranch had not only survived his incapacity, but thrived under Theodora's guidance. At his insistence, she continued to help with the accounts and planning, their partnership extending beyond the domestic sphere. In late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Theodora found the courage to share the news she had suspected for several weeks. "Samuel," she said, her voice both nervous and excited, "I believe I'm with child." His face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby, are you certain?" She nodded. "As certain as I can be. It should come in late spring, I think." He pulled her into his arms, mindful of his still healing leg, and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" "For coming west. For staying, despite our rocky beginning. For making my life infinitely richer than I ever dreamed it could be." She smiled against his chest. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a second chance when you had every right to send me away." "Best decision I ever made," he said firmly. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing rain to the valley and snow to the distant mountains, Theodora's body changed, rounding with the new life growing within her. Samuel watched her with a mixture of pride and protective concern, insisting she rest more and hiring a young woman from town to help with the heavier household chores. Christmas brought a rare snowfall to the ranch, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. They celebrated quietly, exchanging simple gifts: a new hat Theodora had secretly knitted for Samuel, a rocking chair he had commissioned from the town carpenter for her. "For when the baby comes," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth wood. "It's perfect," she said, blinking back happy tears. That night, as they lay in bed watching the snow fall past their window, Theodora reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A journey that had begun with deception but had transformed into something true and beautiful. "Any regrets?" Samuel asked, as if reading her thoughts. She turned in his arms to face him. "About coming here, about us, not a single one. Even though I wasn't the cultured gentleman you expected," she smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. "Especially because of that. I needed a partner, not a patron. Someone to build a life with, not someone to rescue me. And I needed a woman of substance, not a delicate flower who would wilt at the first sign of hardship." He placed his hand on her rounded belly, feeling the gentle movement within. "We found exactly what we needed in each other, even if it wasn't what we thought we wanted." Spring came early that year, bringing wildflowers to the hills and new calves to the herd. Theodora's time drew near, and Samuel insisted on bringing in a midwife to stay at the ranch for the final weeks of her pregnancy. Mrs. Rodriguez was a godsend, experienced, calm, and reassuring. She took over the running of the household, allowing Theodora to rest and prepare for the birth. "Your husband, he loves you very much," Mrs. Rodriguez observed one afternoon as they sat shelling peas on the porch. "He watches you like you might disappear." Theodora smiled, rubbing her swollen belly. "We found each other in an unusual way. Sometimes I think he still can't believe I stayed." "However you found each other, it was meant to be," the older woman said with certainty. "Some matches are written in the stars." The birth, when it came, was long and difficult. Theodora labored through a day and night, Samuel pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door, only Mrs. Rodriguez's firm assurances keeping him from bursting in. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought Samuel rushing into the room despite the midwife's protests. "A boy," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, placing the swaddled infant in Theodora's arms. "Strong and healthy." Theodora looked down at the tiny face, overcome with love so intense it took her breath away. "Samuel, come meet your son." Samuel approached the bed with reverence, his eyes wide as he gazed at the child. "He's perfect," he whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Would you like to hold him?" With trembling hands, Samuel took his son, cradling him as if he were made of the finest porcelain. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father." Tears slipped down Theodora's cheeks as she watched her husband with their child, tears of joy, of exhaustion, of overwhelming gratitude for the path that had led her to this moment. "What shall we name him?" Samuel asked, looking up at her. "I was thinking Thomas, after Tom." "Without him, we might never have met." Samuel nodded, smiling. "Thomas Garrison, it suits him." Mrs. Rodriguez shooed Samuel out soon after, insisting that mother and baby needed rest. But that evening, he returned with something in his hands, a small, carved wooden box. "What's this?" Theodora asked as he placed it on the bed beside her. "Open it," he urged. Inside, she found the letters she had sent him, tied with a faded blue ribbon, alongside those he had sent her, which she had brought with her from Boston. "I thought we might keep them," he explained. "For Thomas when he's older, so he can know the story of how his parents found each other." "Even though they're full of lies?" she asked, touching the papers gently. "They led us to truth," Samuel said, taking her hand, "and that's a story worth telling." As the years passed, the Garrison Ranch prospered and grew. Samuel and Theodora added 2 more children to their family, a daughter, Elizabeth, named in a gesture of healing for Samuel's past, and another son, James. Theodora never regretted the deception that had brought her west. From the moment Samuel had looked at her at the Sacramento station and said, "Your letter was full of lies, but we'll build truth together instead," she had known she was where she was meant to be. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Samuel presented her with a gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children. "It's beautiful," she said, as he fastened it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as the life we've built together," he replied, drawing her into his arms. Theodora rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "From lies to truth," she murmured. "And from truth to love," he finished, kissing the top of her head. In the distance, the California sun sank toward the horizon, painting the ranch in hues of gold and amber. The cattle lowed gently in the pasture. The children's laughter rang clear in the evening air, and in Samuel's arms, Theodora knew she had found her truest home not in a place, but in a love built on honesty, respect, and the courage to begin again.